To his supporters, he was a beacon of hope for the poor in a depression-ravaged America. To his enemies, he was a radical and dangerous dictator who held Louisiana in a chokehold. This is the story of Huey P. Long, one of the most notable and controversial politicians of the American interwar period. Nicknamed the Kingfish, Long was a pure force of nature who at times seemed impossible to stop. His rocket-fueled journey onto the national political stage was one characterised by incredible ambition and a ruthless distaste for all those who opposed him. Indeed, by 1935, the senator and former Louisiana governor was becoming so popular amongst struggling workers across the country that it seemed the run for the presidency was just a matter of time. But fate would seemingly have other ideas, for in September of that year, a young doctor in Louisiana's state capital pointed a pistol at Huey's abdomen and froze all of his political ambitions forever. Though later overshadowed by the political assassinations of the 1960s, the killing of Huey Long is one that has nevertheless gone down in Louisiana folklore, sparking almost a century of mythology, debates, and questions over both his legacy and over whether or not the young doctor was truly the man responsible for the senator's death. Today we look at the assassination of Huey Long, a killing that shook Louisiana politics forever. The Louisiana State Capitol building dominates the downtown of the city of Baton Rouge. Built in the early 1930s, there is perhaps no greater physical manifestation of Huey Long's ambition, grand promises, and ability to ruffle the feathers of the state's political and business elite. His journey was one of impoverished boy to practicing lawyer to national political star, a rise that at its heart featured a populist appeal dressed with oratory flair. After failing to secure the Louisiana governorship in 1924, Huey nevertheless succeeded 4 years later, becoming the boss of his home state at the age of just 34. Appealing to poor whites who had long been trodden on by Louisiana's political establishment, Huey Long got to work developing a massive program of public infrastructure works along with increased social provisions. Taxes on wealthy individuals were thus raised, and Long also wasted no time in going after his lifelong nemesis, the Standard Oil Company. Everything Long did was fueled by a limitless ambition wrapped in an ironclad self-confidence. For in another symbolic middle finger to the Louisiana political elite, Long also built a new governor's mansion. A long-held legend suggests that he designed it in the style of the White House in order to acquaint himself with it in preparation for the day where he would one day become US president. Whilst this legend perhaps isn't true, what is true is that in 1935 he wrote a book named My First Days in the White House to look ahead to his supposed future presidency and underlining just how far his ambitions stretched. But there was also a darker side to Huey Long, for it quickly became apparent that you would not want to be on the wrong side of him. When he wasn't busy fighting back against newspapers owned by his enemies, Huey could be found clearing out the state government and bureaucracy, then filling them with his own political allies. Opponents were shouted down, legislation was passed with lightning speed, and in 1929 Long almost became a victim of political impeachment. During this period he said, "I used to try to get things done by saying please, now I just dynamite them out of my path." One of the many people stood in that path was a judge named Benjamin Henry Pavey, who would eventually become a key part of Long's story, but more on him later. Already deciding he had outgrown the governorship, in 1930 Huey Long was elected to the US Senate. He left the seat vacant for over a year, however, as he looked to ensure that he would leave behind a friendly successor and a compliant Louisiana government to work with. After a dispute, his lieutenant governor and former ally Paul Sear was sacked and replaced with someone more loyal. Now in Washington, it was time for Long to take his political agenda nationwide, and in a USA now reeling from the Great Depression and mass unemployment, many people were willing to listen. He quickly distinguished himself as a left-wing opponent of the president and his one-time political ally Franklin D. Roosevelt, claiming that the New Deal, the president's flagship initiative to rebuild the US economy, did not go far enough. Instead, in 1934 Long offered his own alternative to the nation, the Share Our Wealth plan. Fitting with his political slogan to make every man a king, this plan, outlined in a radio broadcast, proposed massive wealth redistribution, including a yearly income cap on the mega wealthy and a guaranteed minimum income to all households. A number of Share Our Wealth clubs quickly began to pop up throughout the country, and there was even a growing belief that Long would challenge Roosevelt at the 1936 election. Could Long achieve his ultimate goal and reach the presidency? Either way, even Roosevelt himself is believed to have privately said that he considered Long to be one of the most dangerous men in America. But despite his limitless ambition and ever-growing stature, back home in Louisiana, the divided state that Long had left behind had now become a toxic stew, a political powder keg that could ignite at any moment. For all the opponents he had shaken, undermined, and outright bulldozed to the curb were still around, and only getting louder. Baton Rouge was about to explode, and Huey Long was to feel its wrath. By 1935, Huey Long was well aware of the bitter divide that plagued his own state, and the bubbling rage of his opponents. Bodyguards now encircled him when out in public, and there were whispers of a potential attempt on the senator's life, rumours that were acknowledged by Long himself. Then soon came the red-letter date of the Huey Long story, September the 8th, 1935. Back in his familiar stomping ground of the Louisiana state capital, Long was strolling through the building at 9:20 in the evening, flanked by bodyguards and members of the press. Suddenly, an inconspicuous young man stepped out from the shadows, and before Long's acid tongue could so much as make a sound, the crack of gunfire quickly ripped through the corridors of the Capitol. Long had been hit at very close range, and in a daze stumbled out into the Baton Rouge night air, leaving his stunned bodyguards to rain hell on the assassin. The man who had cut down the Kingfish was one Carl Austin Weiss, a respected 28-year-old doctor and former president of the Louisiana Medical Society. Why was he in the state capitol that night? If you remember, I mentioned earlier a district judge named Benjamin Henry Pavey. The bill that Long signed in the Capitol that night was one to redraw the boundaries of Pavey's judicial district, to gerrymander him and bring about his downfall. Well, Carl Weiss was Pavey's son-in-law, and had seemingly travelled to the Capitol to either plead Pavey's case or take his revenge. Notably, other members of Pavey's family had been dismissed from teaching jobs by the education board that Long controlled, and Weiss himself was supposedly one of the many opposed to Long's style of rule, all of which may have also played into his motive. But any answers would not be forthcoming. For immediately after shooting Louisiana's effective dictator, the bodyguards seized upon Weiss, and within seconds unleashed a barrage of bullets that would quickly leave the assassin in a lifeless heap on the shiny floor of the Capitol. Meanwhile, the stricken Huey Long was rushed to a nearby hospital and operated on. Suffering from a grave wound that was quickly compounded by questionable medical care, Long soon arrived at death's door. In the early hours of September the 10th, the Kingfish, and one of the United States' most imposing political figures, passed away at the age of 42. It had effectively been a suicide mission, but Carl Weiss had slain one of America's most polarizing politicians and avenged his family's sufferings. Or had he? For whilst this narrative of the assassination is the one that has been told for the past 90 years, it is also one that has been ferociously argued over. And so began a Louisiana mystery. Was Weiss a deranged individual who threw his life away in the name of vengeance? Or was he merely the fuel to ignite a political atmosphere that could withstand this volatility no longer? As many of those who despised Huey Long flocked to Carl Weiss's funeral in an act of defiance, a never-ending mystery was already beginning to brew. For both men were now gone, without any further elaboration on the night in question, without an autopsy, and in Weiss's case, without a single word said. Out of the quickly cut and dried nature of the investigation, questions began to emerge as to the exact nature of what took place on that one night in 1935. The most prominent theory put forward by those who claim that Weiss was innocent suggests that Weiss did not shoot Long, but instead punched him after Long ignored or insulted him. Long's bodyguards then drew their weapons on the assailant, the Kingfish was hit in the crossfire, and the rest was history. Denials of Weiss committing the murder of course came from those close to him, cultivating an image of the young doctor as a mild-mannered individual, someone too wise to throw away his stable family life and respected position in society. Regardless of whether or not this portrayal is accurate, we do well to remind ourselves that history is full of seemingly unlikely assassins. As mild-mannered as he supposedly was, as mentioned, Weiss did not seem to be fond of Huey Long based on conversations that he had had with colleagues and acquaintances. Of course, even the idea that he punched the senator still suggests Weiss held some level of animosity towards him. The theory that Long insulted Weiss in the corridor also seems to have little evidence to support it. In fairness to those who suggest Weiss only punched the senator, it's plausible that such an act could trigger an ultimately tragic storm of gunfire given the sky-high tensions and volatility that plagued Louisiana politics at the time. Interestingly, when he arrived at the hospital that night, Long was noticed to have a bloodied lip, and is alleged to have said to at least one nurse treating him the words, "That's where he hit me." Unsurprisingly, this has been of huge interest to those who dispute the official sequence of events, but on the contrary, it has also been suggested that this bloodied lip could have come from a stray punch thrown by a bodyguard as they seized upon Weiss. Doubled over as he stumbled out of the Capitol, some sources also claim that Huey slipped on the stairs and fell, hitting his head and splitting his lip. Being something of a microcosm of the case as a whole, pinning down exactly what happened here has proven to be extremely difficult. But over half a century later came a breakthrough in this increasingly cold case. In 1991, Weiss's long-lost pistol was discovered in the ownership of a woman whose father had been involved in the original investigation. As the case reopens, not only was the pistol found, but along with it a fired bullet, one that was quickly proven to have not been fired from Weiss's weapon. But surprisingly, it did not come from the bodyguard's weapons either, leaving its origin a mystery. In this investigation, Weiss's remains were also exhumed. There were found to be very few signs of damage to his hands, undermining the theory that he had thrown a punch. The discussion surrounding the punch and Huey's bloodied lip form just two of the many deeply debated details that historians have been exploring for the past 90 years. Other points of discussion include the idea that Weiss was not carrying a pistol and that one was later stolen from his car and planted on him by the bodyguards, but could they really have done this in the plain view of several eyewitnesses? Weiss's brother also found that the car had been moved and was uncharacteristically messy inside. Was it tampered with, or was it simply towed away for being a vehicle in front of the Capitol with no permit? Ultimately, this is just a brief examination of some aspects of a debate that will probably rage on forever, not least because of the shocking and notorious nature of the assassination itself. It was the story of a political maverick and all-encompassing presence who had been scythed down whilst at the very height of his power. A man who did so much to advocate for the poor, but at the same time brought the hammer down on his opponents ruthlessly, becoming the demagogue of the Deep South. Had he lived, then the Kingfish may well have been ready to take a punt at the presidency itself, but instead, today many know of him for the untimely and mysterious nature of his assassination. According to witness accounts and official investigations, that night a young man in the Capitol drew a pistol and cut an eternal hole through Huey's limitless ambitions. But what exactly happened that night will likely be debated forever, along with the endlessly polarizing legacy of the Kingfish of Louisiana. As always, we hope you enjoyed this video, thank you for watching, subscribe for more from the Assassinations Archive.